This is a very special reading tonight. I know I always say that, but it really is tonight. And usually I do introduce all the poets. There's three tonight at once. But since we have a guest from another country, I'm going to do it a little bit different tonight. I'm going to introduce Bruce McEver first, and then Bruce will read 15 minutes or so, and I'll get up and introduce Quay Mai and Bruce Weigl, our special guests tonight. But Bruce McEver, many of you know, is a Georgia Tech alum. Went off to Harvard Business School after Georgia Tech. Started Berkshire Capital, of which he is the CEO and the founder, as I said. He's now a professor. He still does that, of course, but he's a professor of the practice here at Georgia Tech, team teaching a course with Ken Knespel. Bruce is one of these two-brain people. He has a extraordinary left brain that allows him to do the kind of business that he does, and I think he's doing okay. He's done okay in that business. But he's also a poet. He's also a right brain. He's got both brains burning at the same time. He's published 2 books of poems, A Full Horizon and Scaring Up the Morning. He's nearly finished a new book. He's published widely in literary magazines, Plowshares, the Atlanta Review, Cortland Review, several others. Billy Collins said of his poetry, there's a musical balance and a quiet authority to these poems. And I'll add to that generous and seeking spirit. Bruce is an extraordinary man and an extraordinary friend of Georgia Tech. Please welcome him, Bruce McEver.
Thank you, Tom. That's very generous. And thank you, Jackie, for supporting poetry at Tech and everything. Hi there. So this is these are some selections out of the new book, and it's some of my regular poems and some elegies for people. As you get my age, your friends start to pass away, and also it's a narrative. And it's a narrative about a club that I really didn't want to be part of. It's a divorce. And I know that, that's sort of a club that many of us share, and it's probably one of the worst chapters in any of our lives. And so it sort of wound in this. And so this is about this first poem is about something that happened in Mystic, Connecticut. Now that's sort of interesting. I love the name Mystic, Connecticut to begin with. It's near the nuclear subbase in New London, and some things happen in Mystic, things happen or things pop up besides nuclear submarines. Anyway, I'll just start. At the time blossoms litter the streets with snow-like drifts, I stayed with friends in Mystic. Remembering who brought us together, we emptied 2 vintage bottles. With first light, I was aware of a body breathing next to me, as sure as she bedded with me as wife, a warm nakedness with long blonde hair next to me now. But it was no dream. I was scared to squeeze it, to lose this vision, whose ashes I scattered along a river over 3 years ago. Was this possible? A ghost? A dream? It breathed, and it tried to tell me something, emanating a compassion, to help me understand. No, don't leave. Stay. Show me your face. Tell me it's you. But she was gone. As soon as I thought to hold on to her, like a morning's bird song, I went downstairs for coffee, and our friends chanced a reappearance. After goodbyes, I got on the road, and once out of the shadow of the town's scant cell service, messages filled my phone. It's assumed the screen Her mother had passed last night. This daughter-child bond reached across realms, as was her way. She had to tell me herself. My car spun whirlwinds through spindrifts. After that, I never really doubted the resurrection. Fog of separation. Now, I live in a valley, and sort of at the change of seasons, the fog fills this valley, but it goes around. I'm right across from a mountain called Canaan Mountain, and it goes around, sort of builds a halo around this mountain, and then moves around the valley. It's quite dramatic, particularly at the change of seasons. Fog of separation fills the valley, crosses into June, our anniversary. It came overnight like a nocturnal creature feeding the things you'd wish you'd done differently. Its trail clear in the morning dew. In the east, a glow backlights the ghost of morning, like her need of space, a void over the mountain of your old attitudes and gripes you must climb over to change. A wispy curtain retreats to circle around the mountain's base, leaving a white halo. Maybe she'll call. You carry your phone everywhere not to miss its ring, perhaps an answer to your email, your text, or one of your overpouring letters. Maybe say thanks for the flowers you sent. Just let you explain. But the fog vanishes to a cacophony of birds singing up the start of your empty summer. This is a poem for one of my partners that passed away about the same time. For our partner, Richard Stewart Foote, May 28, 1963 to April 25th, 2014. It was the time, it was at the time tulips soldier up straight and brighten Park Avenue's corners early spring. In a mahogany-chaired conference room overlooking the traffic tangle on that avenue below, we gathered to review his deal. With swept-back hair and a broad smile, Richard was in fine form. Lean in a tailored blazer, he exuded confidence. As he explained the subtleties of his model, you could see the path to the very gates of Golconda open wide. It all meshed like a Bach fugue, the notes complex yet ethereal, in hearing even hummable. We parted, shaking hands and joking, and Richard scootered off to chemo, like Jesus rode the ass's colt through the cheers and waving palms to Calvary. Our partner and friend, a brilliant, courageous warrior banker, we could always count on till his Lord called him that day of tulips. Richard he had a little scooter that he moved around New York traffic in, and he had a heart attack in his doctor's office, age 53. At the end of the week, where I buried my partner, like a son, I retreated into the valley and biked into the clouds. The storm left the field bereft with puddles, as over the horizon thunderheads vengeanced east. In its wake, pairs of mallards had taken refuge on bare field ponds. I suspect they mate and nest there, making families on the run. A black cow slogged off through the mud toward the back pasture, her udder dragging the ground, the backside dilating. She sought some place resembling green pasture to drop her calf and swaddle him like the other little Angus around the hoof-churned muddy expanse of the birthing pen. The moms licked the bloody afterbirth from their foundlings. Life renews, and yellow colt's feet are up along ditches and celebrate, along with the peeper chorus in the wetlands, and hail the new arrivals and pull me from my woe. This is called Turtle in the Road. Sometimes we get signs. I mean, we pick up a lot from things and animals and the environment around us. I very much work with images, and some things you just don't forget. Sometimes I think nature's trying to tell us some things. We just don't listen. The day we were married, after the recessional, through the cheers of friends, pelting of rice and petals, one of your sons wanted to ride with us to the reception. He climbed in the car between us, and you wouldn't ask him to move, leaving me to play the bad guy. The limo took the back road, and we were high talking about the service, how funny the preacher had been, when the driver slammed on the brakes for a hulking, snapping turtle crossing. Something from the Jurassic. Armored, she took her time to cross the road after laying her eggs, clomping to the safety of the swamp. It was a sign. Mother's Earth symbol. This beast carries the world on her back, saying to us, go slow, consider. Every year we have a mother turtle cross the road from the river to our farm's pasture and lay her eggs there. I see her sometimes close up in the blackberry, ancient and beastly, having survived longer than us. The weekend after you served the divorce papers for our anniversary dinner, I biked along our road. There was a fresh turtle nest dug up by a raccoon. White feathery shells lay scattered after being sucked dry. The coon had scat on the nest. Soon after your affair was dug up, I went for a walk by the wetlands near Friends. There I saw a mother turtle, her head just out of her nest, laying her eggs, looking at me saying, the world goes on. I carry it on my back. There may also be hope for you elsewhere. This is a poem called Like Lesser Gods, and I'm thinking about this for the title for the book. We wing south in a full plane, strapped and bumping through heat-hazed skies. Suddenly thunderheads rise as high as we fly to quench an exhausted earth below. Sun pinks the massive bellows, internally pulsed and illuminated by Thor's lightning bolts. Like lesser gods, we've conquered in our age of radar. Our jet plane plays between the white mountains. Up here with this vista, my father went to work. We continue south, jostled home to Atlanta, where my mother, the keeper of our family's memory, is bedfast and can no longer answer her phone to tell me that she has left the keys out for me, as she always has. This is called The Inn at Germantown. The first gray of morning stirs me in a strange room. Then the birds began their overtures. Human kindness sleeps on. I dress in stocking toe down creaky stairs to a kitchen piled with last night's dishes. I managed to make coffee, and wafts of the dark elixir fill the parlor. On the wall, a romantic reproduction of Daphnis and Chloe scantily clad, seeking shelter from an oncoming storm. I find milk and a veranda that wraps this classic inn. Flags still festoon lampposts from Friday's parade, celebrating the town's patriots. A will-o-wisp fills the low field beyond a barbecue pit at the end of the porch. There the laden fog ebbs and flows, played by the breeze and the sun's warming. The meadow there unveils a profusion of daisies and black-eyed Susans, the good ground in the sower's parable. There's been no word for weeks. I'm still staggered by the last words of my wife's co-worker who managed to call me before going home Thursday and reported that my wife's okay, but had taken off her wedding ring. And this is a poem called The Bridge Man. I think we need more bridge men in this world. Bridge Man was busy with his pan and broom, sweeping up autumn's spill, scattered like gold coins over the Housatonic River Bridge outside Canaan. A true volunteer, like a Minuteman. No one appointed him to his job, yet like going to church or doing his wash, he shows up each week to clean his bridge. Think how great if every citizen adopted a bridge, a street, or a little unloved corner of town and just cared for it. Maybe for him the bridge is sacred, his cathedral, a ticket to heaven. Maybe authorities could sell caring rights like indulgences. Despite all my efforts for an interview, he will not divulge his plan. He manages he only manages an acknowledging grunt, and with the cigarette pursed between his bearded lips, the ash dangling yet never falling, he keeps sweeping. This last one is called On the Island of the Sleeping Loon. On the Island of the Smiling Loon. Afternoon rain tingles on the cabin's pane, washing the memory into the lake, moating the rustic pine island. Thunderstorms parade north across Fern Lake as 6 souls drop off to afternoon naps after a long drive here and news a lost brother was safe. Despite all efforts to forget the betrayal of a wife and a friend, still pits your stomach. You know you must forgive her or give it up to God. Compassion sleeps beside you, sharing her island, and somewhere in the water lilies a loon wails that haunting sound, hearkening something primeval, going way back. That's simple and primitive, like clean living and faith in keeping your word. These white and black feathered birds seek clear water, stand their ground, and mate for life. Thank you.
I'm not sure exactly what Bruce and Quay Mai are going to do. They planned a program. Quay Mai is going to, I know is going to read some of her poems in Vietnamese. Bruce will read some of his translations of her poems. She might read some of her own poems in English. Bruce is going to read some of his own poems. We'll just see what they're going to do. But Bruce has been I'll introduce him first. He's been a prominent voice in American poetry for at least 30 years now. He's published many, many books. They're books, by the way. I hope everybody got a free book. Pretty much everybody here should have gotten a free book by one of these 3 poets here. And they'll be signing the books afterwards. So get your book signed, pick up a book and get it signed. There's also some books for sale, too, that the ones we're not giving away. But as I said, Bruce has been a prominent poet in America for over 30 years. He's especially known for his poems having to do with the war in Vietnam. Bruce served in Vietnam in the Army and combat and was decorated for his service in Vietnam. And has been going back to Vietnam for over 20 years, quite frequently, to meet what he refers to as his former enemies, writers and poets, where they talk, they translate, publish each other, learn more about each other constantly. He loves the country and the people of Vietnam. And about 4 or 5 years ago, he met Quay Mai, who's a well-known, younger but well-known Vietnamese poet. She's published 3 books in Vietnam. She's a translator too, and has published translations of several books as well. She was born in 1973, which is right towards the end of the war in Vietnam. She grew up on a farm. Her family were teachers and farmers, and she grew up on a farm not far from Hanoi. I don't have their books. I'd hold them up, but they just published a translation of Quay Mai's selected poems here in English, and that's one of the books that's being given away, as well as both Bruce's books. But this is a very special reading. Poetry is. There's many different languages in the world, obviously, but there's really only one poetry. Every single culture on the face of the earth has invented a poetry of their own. They didn't learn it from another culture. They invented it on their own. Every single culture throughout history, since before language, before there was written language, still now with many cultures that don't even have a written language, poetry exists. Poetry is something that is universal. It is one language, and when we can have poets from different countries, and maybe even different countries that had conflicts with each other. I'm going to announce at another reading in the spring there's going to be something sponsored by Poets House here in Atlanta, at several of the public libraries in Atlanta, Muslim poetry and Muslim culture combination with sponsored by Poets House and American poets. There's going to be 3 programs in the fall here in Atlanta. I'll announce them as they come. But this is a very special event here. This doesn't happen every day. So please welcome Quay Mai and Bruce Weigl.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you all for coming. I'm very happy to be back at Tech. I remember the warm and generous audience that I encountered last time I was here. And I know there's a great love of poetry here, largely thanks to the presence of Mr. Lux. I have to do a little bit of housekeeping before we begin, because I haven't had the opportunity much during the last 30 years to read in Tom's presence. And I have to say that we're very close in age. We're 3 years apart. But he was one of my teachers at Oberlin College. After the war, I found myself miraculously there as a student. And I really didn't know what to write about. It hadn't occurred to me to write about my experience in the war. I'd written a few poems, and my first teacher suggested that it was probably not a good idea to write about the war because no one really wanted to hear about it anymore. Ironically, the war was still going on. This was 1970. Tom Lux, one evening in his office, I sat down with him, and I was actually walking by his building, and I saw his light on late at night, and I went down to his office. These were the days when you could share a drink with a student. Maybe at Oberlin they still do that, I'm not sure. And he invited me to sit down and have a drink, and he actually asked me about my experience in the war, which people didn't do. So I told him a story about something that had happened there, and as soon as I finished, he pushed a notepad, a legal pad, in my direction and said, "You should write that down just like you said it." And that moment changed my life forever and allowed me to become most fully the writer that I've become. And without that encouragement, I wouldn't be standing here today. I'm sure of it. So please, thank you. I'm very happy to introduce the work, to introduce my wonderful friend and the work of Nguyen Phan Quay Mai. As Tom said, we met 5 years ago through poetry at a conference in Hanoi, Vietnam, and began working together almost immediately on translations. It's the 3 years that we worked together on this project, I worked harder than I've ever worked in my life. She's an incredible taskmaster and insisted at every turn on absolute perfection and wouldn't settle for anything less. I'm grateful now for that. And what we're going to do is we're going to read some of Khuê Mai's poems in translation. And the method that we've decided to use tonight is to read the poem first in English, so that when you hear the Vietnamese version, you already have an idea about what you're hearing, and maybe some of the rhythms you can pick up. There's some daunting problems that anyone who translates Vietnamese poetry faces, not the least of which is that Vietnamese is a highly contextual language, and most of the references are contextual with regard to the culture. So sometimes a few words or a simple phrase can bring huge imagery into the Vietnamese reader's minds. It's hard to do that in English. Another aspect, of course, is that Vietnamese is a tonal language, and often in poetry the rhythms of the line, even in so-called free verse poems, comes from the variations of those tones. So we've tried very hard in these English versions to come as close as possible. So we're going to read some of Khuê Mai's poems, and interspersed in between I'm going to read some of mine. The first poem is called The Gardener in the Royal Citadel. And I'm going to let Khuê Mai introduce the background of this poem. Thunder bends tree trunks. The gardener engrosses himself in sowing each seed of grass. Tempests sink the city. The gardener engrosses himself in sowing each seed of grass. Plumera flowers are white around his gray hair, flamboyant flowers red alongside his faded shirt, lotus flowers pink under his cracked hands. Royal courts decline. The gardener engrosses himself in sowing each seed of grass. On the collapsed royal dynasties, the sweat of humans rises from their ashes.
Người làm vườn trong đại nội. Tiếng sét oằn thân cây. Người làm vườn miệt mài ươm từng mầm cỏ. Lũ nhấn chìm thành phố. Người làm vườn miệt mài ươm từng mầm cỏ. Hoa đại trắng trên tóc ông bạc. Hoa phượng đỏ bên áo ông phai. Hoa sen hồng dưới bàn tay thô ráp. Những triều đại lụi tàn. Người làm vườn miệt mài ươm từng mầm cỏ. Trên những triều vua đã đổ, mồ hôi người vươn lên tươi xanh. Thank you so much for being here today. It's really cold, but your presence warmed me. Thank you. You know, before coming here, I heard that poetry is dead in America, but you proved it wrong. Thank you so much for being here. Our chairs are vacant, so please take a seat. Please sit here. Those who need.
It's okay.
The poem I just read is about the ancient capital of Vietnam, where many kingdoms have existed and collapsed. And if you have you been to Vietnam? Raise your hands, people here. Only one. Oh no, we have to change that. Please come to Vietnam. You know, Vietnam has been voted as one of the top countries to visit by international tourists. And if you go there, you know, you have to visit Huế, the city I wrote in that poem, and it's a very romantic city. And you know, girls are wearing the traditional dresses. We call them áo dài, and they are bicycling. You know, they cycle to school wearing this, and it's, you know, you fall in love with them. So it's a beautiful, beautiful city. When I think about Vietnam, I think about my mother. Just like my country, my mother has been through many wars, and she has suffered a lot of losses and a lot of sorrow, but she's the most beautiful person I know. She's very resilient and very kind, and I write this poem for her called My Mother's Rise. So Bruce is going to read it first in English.
Through the eyes of my childhood, I watched my mother, who labored in a kitchen built from straw and mud. She lifted a pair of chopsticks and twirled sunlight into a pot of boiling rice. The perfume of a new harvest soaked her worn shirt as she bent and fed rice straws to the hungry flames. I wanted to come and help, but the child in me pulled myself into a dark corner where I could watch my mother's face teach beauty how to glow in hardship and how to sing the rice to cook with her sun-baked hands. That day in our kitchen, I saw how perfection was arranged by soot-blackened pans and pots and by the bent back of my mother, so thin she would disappear if I wept or cried out.
Gian bếp của mẹ. Qua đôi mắt tuổi thơ, tôi nhìn mẹ tôi tất tả trong gian bếp được dựng lên bằng rơm và bùn quánh. Mẹ nhấc đũa lên, quấy nắng vào nồi cơm đang sôi. Vạt áo mẹ đẫm hương thơm của mùa gặt mới, tay mẹ mớm rơm khô cho ngọn lửa đói bập bùng. Tôi muốn đến cạnh bên và giúp mẹ, nhưng đứa trẻ trong tôi kéo tôi chui vào góc bếp tối thẳm. Từ nơi đó tôi nhìn gương mặt mẹ dạy cho vẻ đẹp cách bừng lên trong gian khổ và cách hát cho cơm sôi bằng đôi tay rám nắng của người. Ngày hôm đó, trong gian bếp của tuổi thơ tôi, sự hoàn hảo được sắp đặt bằng những chiếc nồi đen tuyền bồ hóng và bởi chiếc lưng khom của mẹ mỏng manh trống chếnh sẽ biến mất nếu tôi khóc hay kêu lên. For hundreds of years, Vietnam was dominated by the Chinese, and then we were occupied by the French and invaded by the Japanese, and then came the American War. So during the 1945, there was a terrible thing which was called the Great Hunger. Nearly 2 million Vietnamese died, and that's 10% of the population in the north. In many villages, more than half of the people died, and many families disappeared, and no one continued to bring their name forward. And my own grandmother died in the Great Hunger of 1945, and so many people died. So my grandmother died with her very young child and her brother at the same time. So many people in our village died at the same time that there were not enough living people to bury them. So they had to be buried together. So for 65 years, my father suffered because he couldn't find his mother's grave. And for Vietnamese, it's very important. We go to the grave, we burn the incense, and with the incense smoke, the soul of our ancestors will come home. And for 65 years, my father couldn't do that. And I remember watching him suffer. And it was a miracle that my aunt, who still lived in our village, she did everything to find the grave. And once she went to a fortune teller, and the fortune teller showed her the way. And I think it's the spirit of our ancestors who showed her the way. And when they dug up this place next to a rice field, they found 3 sets of bone. A set of bone of a woman with a child in her arm next to another adult. That's how we recognize that's my grandmother. And I went back to the village first. I stood in front of the grave and I imagined that my father was there with me. And this is the poem I can't yet name.
My hands lift high a bowl of rice, the seeds harvested in the field where my grandmother was laid to rest. Each rice seed tastes sweet as the sound of lullaby from my grandmother I never knew. I imagine her soft face as they laid her down into the earth, her clothes battered, her skin stuck to her bones. In the great hunger of 1945, my village was starved for graves to bury all the dead. Nobody could find my grandmother's grave, so my father tasted bitter rice for 65 years. After 65 years of searching, spirits of my ancestors led my father and me to my grandmother's grave. I heard my father call Mum for the first time. The rice field behind his back trembled. My feet clung to the mud. I listened in the burning incense how my grandmother's soul spread, joining the earth, taking root in the field where she quietly sang lullabies, calling the rice plants to blossom. Lifting the bowl of rice in my hands, I count every seed, each one glistening with the sweat of my ancestors, their backs bent in the rice fields, the fragrance of my grandmother's lullaby alive on each one of them.
Bài thơ chưa thể đặt tên. Nâng bát cơm trên tay, những hạt gạo gặt từ cánh đồng bà tôi nằm xuống. Từng hạt gạo ngọt thơm như lời ru của bà, người tôi chưa từng biết mặt. Tôi hình dung khuôn mặt bà mềm mại khi bà được chôn vào trong lòng đất. Quần áo tơi tả, da bám chặt với xương. Trận đói năm 45, làng tôi đói mồ chôn xác chết. Mồ bà không ai biết. Bát cơm đắng miệng cha tôi 65 năm. 65 năm sau, hương hồn tổ tiên dẫn cha và tôi đến trước mộ bà. Lần đầu tiên tôi nghe cha gọi mẹ. Cánh đồng lúa sau lưng cha run rẩy. Hai chân tôi gắn chặt vào bùn, nghe trong khói hương hồn bà lan tỏa, bám sâu vào rễ, mọc rễ vào ruộng đồng. Bà se sẻ hát ru gọi lúa trổ đồng. Nâng bát cơm trên tay, tôi đếm từng hạt gạo. Từng hạt óng ánh thơm mồ hôi của tổ tiên tôi còng lưng gieo gặt. Từng hạt óng ánh thơm, lời ru của bà tôi đơm lên từ lòng đất. Ngoài kia, trong hoàng hôn, lời ru của bà tôi vẫn khe khẽ trổ đồng. So you know, rice is very important for Vietnamese. Each meal, you know, we have to eat rice. So it's so common that if you eat, you ask someone, have you eaten? You say, ăn cơm chưa? Have you eaten rice? So Bruce has been to Vietnam, so he understands the importance of rice. So a few years ago, Bruce has adopted a Vietnamese daughter and brought her up so well, and she speaks and writes perfect Vietnamese, and that's such an achievement from him. And you know, her name is Hạnh, and her mother is a very special lady. She was very sick and very poor, and she wasn't married, so she had to give Hạnh up to an orphanage, and she died. She died how many years ago? 4 years ago, and you know, when she died, they found a box in her very humble home. In that box, she had all the money, all the gifts that Bruce and Hạnh have sent her. She didn't spend anything, even though she was living in absolute poverty. So Hạnh asked Bruce to write a poem to carve on the gravestone. So I translated that poem into Vietnamese, and if you ever visit Vietnam and go to that village, you see that poem there. And Bruce is going to read this poem in English, and I will read the translation in Vietnamese. Okay, I read first in Vietnamese. Is it okay? Lời thơ tặng mẹ Nguyễn Thị Vẻ. Được sinh ra trong văn hóa lúa Hà Nam, đầu tiên là đất, thứ hai là nước, thứ ba là những ngày dài còng lưng dưới mặt trời, thứ tư là thóc giống như cuộc đời mẹ đã bắt đầu dưới bầu trời vần vũ của chiến tranh. Rồi mẹ như cây mạ, sẵn sàng cho số phận được bứng lên từ mảnh ruộng mẹ đã được gieo, để lại được cấy xuống trong hàng hàng những người sống sót. Mẹ vươn lên từ bùn, mẹ vươn trong bão táp. Dậy thì khi lúa trổ đồng, bóng tối hậm hực muốn nhấn chìm vẻ đẹp, mẹ vẫn rì rào xanh mướt xanh, tự do chảy qua những cánh đồng, dễ bám đất kêu mong đồng nặng hạt. Khi lúa chín, mẹ hái gặt điều thiêng liêng nhất của đời mình bằng tiếng hát, bằng yêu thương sâu thẳm trong tim, bằng nước mắt nụ cười ngày làm mẹ. Nhưng số phận chia lìa hai ngả, mẹ lặng lẽ gặt mình thành gốc già, cô liêu trên đồng trống tái màu. Giờ đây mẹ trở về thóc giống, để chúng con cùng nâng niu cất giữ gieo trồng, để những hạt gạo mẹ chúng con ăn vào cơ thể, lại trổ đồng, lại xanh mướt xanh.
Could you say a little bit about the different stages of rice and why the different names?
So in the English version that Bruce wrote, he kept the Vietnamese words, the different stages, how the rice seeds are planted, you know. So for rice farmers in Vietnam, we don't sow the seed straight right away on the field. We plant them in a patch of mud, and then when they're about this high, we uproot them and we plant them again. So you know, the first stage, there are names for different stages of development of the seed. So in Bruce's very special poem, he uses the name of the stages as the stage of a human being.
Thank you. That's a really nice poem in Vietnamese, I must say. It's always been daunting for me to ever attempt to write an occasional poem. I don't work that way. It's not like Joyce Kilmer, you know, where you go out and see a tree and come home and write a poem about it. But my daughter asked me to do this, and I knew that it would be carved into her mother's headstone, so it made it even more daunting. So I decided that what I would try to do is be as Vietnamese as I could when I wrote the poem, and try to write as much as I could from the point of view of Vietnamese, because theoretically I'm writing this on behalf of Nguyen Phan, my daughter, for her mother, Nguyen Phan. Born into the culture of rice in Hanam, first is the soil, second is the water, third are the long days of hard work in the sun, the fourth is the Tok Chung, like the life you began under the stormy sky of war. Then you were like the Ma, ready to be pulled by fate from the place where you had been sown, and then planted again into the rows of survivors. You rise from the mud, you rise from the storms. Dai Ti means the blossom begins, the darkness threatens to sink your beauty, you remain quiet, lush green freely runs through the rice fields, roots deep in the earth, nurturing your rice. At Chin, the rice is picked, the way you picked the most sacred from your life, with your singing voice, with a deep love in your heart, with motherly tears and laughter, but fate divides you into two directions, and you quietly harvest yourself into rice stubble, lonely in the pale field. Now you're back to Tok Chung, that we treasure and save, to plant again, so that your rice that we take into ourselves will blossom again, lush and green.
So I am very lucky to have lived in Hanoi, the capital of Vietnam. It's a beautiful city full of people, but also full of music. One of my favorite music is the music sung by the street sellers. And you know, in Vietnam, the street sellers carry bamboo poles on their shoulder, and they have baskets, and they carry everything past your house, and they sing, "Ai mua cam không?" Who wants to have some oranges? Or they sing their way. So you know, I love their songs, and I love what these women normally they come from the countryside, and they they sacrifice their life so that they can give their children an education. So I wrote this poem for them, Stars in the Shape of Caring Poles.
For the street sellers of Hanoi. The women carry the seasons of guava, mango, and plum to me. The seasons of lotus, green. You know, I have to say that this is one of the first poems of Quay Mai that I worked on. I translated it roughly from the Vietnamese the first time. And it was a poem that really convinced me that I wanted to work with her because of her ability, which is a little bit unusual in Vietnamese poetry, except for recent work, her ability to take us so immediately to the moment at hand and to feel the sensuous detail of the moment. The women carry the seasons of guava, mango, and plum to me, the seasons of lotus, green, young, sticky rice on their shoulders, bringing me the enlightened sunrise, the blue sunset, dragging their sandal footsteps on the road. With such little money, I can buy the seasons of guava and lotus, the small bills silently soaked with dew, soaked with sweat. Behind these women's backs, from orphaned village fields, the wind howls endlessly. They open their embrace, empty lullabies swollen with milk. They carry countless virgin seasons to me, the seasons I would have forgotten without them. The aroma of Nguyen just coming into being, the lotus of Westlake just coming into blood, Bung Village restless to produce the green young sticky rice. They carry me to the fresh breeze from their village, where their mothers, children, and husbands stand waiting, where dreams are thirsty and struggle. I hear their faint singing. In difficulty, the poles press heavy on my shoulder, but I find ways to feed my mother, ignoring people's laughs. They are my stars, carrying their difficult fates on their shoulders, unknown in life, gazing burning questions into my eyes.
Những ngôi sao hình quang gánh, họ gánh về cho tôi những mùa ổi, mùa xoài, mùa mận, mùa sen, mùa cốm trên vai, cả nắng ban mai, cả hoàng hôn tím, ngày đi rưng rưng đôi dép lê. Tôi mua được mùa ổi, mùa sen bằng đồng bạc lẻ, những đồng bạc lặng lẽ, thấm đẫm sương đêm, thấm đẫm mồ hôi. Sau lưng họ những cánh đàn đồng làng mồ côi hun hút gió. Lời ru để ngỏ, lời ru con căng sữa. Họ gánh về cổng tôi ba mùa trinh nguyên, những mùa tôi sẽ quên nếu không có họ. Hương nhãn Hưng Yên vừa vào mùa, sen Tây Hồ vừa nở, cốm làng vòng vừa chăn trở những hạt xanh. Họ gánh tặng tôi ngọn gió mát lành đồng quê, nơi mẹ và con và chồng họ đứng chờ, nơi cơn mơ vùng vằng khác. Tôi văng vẳng nghe họ hát. Gánh thời đòn gánh đè vai, lần hồi nuôi mẹ, lần hồi nuôi mẹ mặc ai chê cười. Những ngôi sao của tôi gánh trên vai mình hầm hiu số phận, vô danh giữa đời thường đặt vào mắt tôi bao tia nhìn mang hình dấu hỏi.
Yeah, that's so nice. Thank you. Here.
So Bruce is going to read one of his poems, The Long-Term Consequences.
I didn't sing my version of the English one. I'll do that after the party. I've been writing for 40 years now, and I served in Vietnam in 1967, 1968, and you would think that I would be over it by now. But one of the things that we've learned about trauma and about conflict and about combat is that in fact you don't get over it. And the best thing to do is to recognize the fact that this is something that's a part of who you are and something that you carry with you for the rest of your life, and to do what you can with it. So that's what I've tried to do as a writer. So my point is that I still go back to that subject, not intentionally, but poetry takes me back there. The beginning of this poem sounds like I'm stuttering, and it's actually written that way. It's called The Long-Term Consequences of the Convoy Leading to Pegasus in the Fallen World. Or when I packed myself up for the loony bin, I didn't know it was the loony bin at the time, was my lousy problem, and I blame myself for that. And I ended up in a field I know is littered with mines because I've seen it before beside a river named Kalu. If my brain allows me just one memory, just one sane moment like the one the photon bright flashes the doctors held inches from my face brought back a radiant time that no one in the room could know but me, like the field of mines I had stood next to on the LZ and walked around more than once and watched a parachute of something drift off target and land there almost softly. The lights the doctors flashed in my eyes and the saline they pumped into my veins, and the 30 hours without sleep brought that morning right back into the room. And that morning became the day of the longest night, night of the 7 dead in the single bunker from the artillery of the other. Night of small arms fire along the river, and movement in the high grass, voices, radio noise, sometimes even their music. Night of the separation of my soul from my body. Such a violent tearing I couldn't even feel.
You know, as Bruce said, we met in 2010, and it was an incredible experience for me because a group of Vietnamese veterans have asked me to please come and interpret for them because, you know, we had a conference and they wanted to meet in the evening. And I was there sitting between the two groups of men, and, you know, they used to be enemies. And Bruce used to fight against one Vietnamese. They were in the same battlefield, on the same fight, right? The same ambush. So I listened to them and I was amazed. And then after that, I heard Bruce's poem, Song of Napalm, and I thought I have to translate his work. I want more Vietnamese to understand about the people of America. And terrible things happened during the war, but I think humans are human. Every side suffers. So, you know, we launched his book. It's called After the Rain Stopped Pounding at the University of Culture. And the room was packed, the hall, the conference hall. We had so many older people who used to be in the war. And they came and listened to Bruce's work, and I saw tears in their eyes, and, you know, I'm really thankful that he's written about his experience, and I think he has built so many bridges of reconciliation. The next poem is about the sea. I love the sea. I love swimming in the sea, even though I can swim in the swimming pool fine, but I'm really scared of deep water, so I panic. So I'm like a child. When I go snorkeling, I wear a life vest. But the sea is full of wonders. It's like poetry. I feel like when I'm at sea, I'm free. Like I'm, you know, when I immerse myself into poetry, and I have to shed myself of all the worries of everything, and only then I'm myself. So Bruce is going to read The Sea.
Now, when you hear the beginning of this poem, you have to think about Kwemai and not me. Naked and white, I dash into the white waves. It's a much more pleasant thought, isn't it? Naked and white, I dash into the white waves. The sea of wonder pins me down in an embrace. the waves above me in a tango that entwines me in a long kiss as deeply as he can. Is it heaven here? How do I find my way home? Red coral, blue shoals of undulating fish, enchanting me until my last breath. Dissolving myself into the sea, I rise in my rebirth.
Biển, hỏa thân trắng lao vào con sóng trắng. Biển diệu kỳ, biển mở rộng vòng tay. Sóng chồm lên điệu tango cuồng nhiệt, nhấn chìm ta trong một chiếc hôn dài. Biển vạm vỡ trẻ trung gân guốc, thoai thoải gồ ghề mềm mại đam mê, kéo ta trôi vào từng cung bậc. Thiên đường đây ư, ta sao biết lối về. San hô đỏ, đàn cá xanh uốn lượn, nắng gọi mời bằng vũ điệu thủy tinh. Biển mê hoặc tận cùng hơi thở, tan vào biển xanh, ta hồi sinh. So, you know, around 3 million people died during the Vietnam-America War. And many of my friends haven't been able to find the remains of their father. I have a very, very close friend, and he's as old as me, so for the last 40 years, he's been trying to, he saves up every year, and then he makes a trip to the previous battlefields, even to Laos, where his father has fought, and he asks for all types of information, hoping to be able to bring his father home. And his mother said, you know, if we don't find him, I won't be able to close my eyes when I die. So I write this poem for those who have fallen, to bring peace to our country, separated worlds.
Separated worlds. Graves of unknown soldiers whiten the sky. Children looking for their fathers' graves whiten the earth. Rain tatters down onto both of them. Children who haven't known their fathers' faces, fathers who live in the lives of wandering souls, their shouts to each other buried deep in their chests. Yet through more than 30 years, the shouts stay alive. Tonight I hear their footsteps coming from two separate worlds. The hurried, trembling footsteps finding each other in the dark. The footsteps sucked dry of blood, lost through millions of miles, lost through thousands of centuries. With each footstep I place in my country, how many bodies of wandering souls will I step on? How many oceans of tears of those who haven't yet found the graves of their father?
Hai nẻo trời và đất. Trắng trời những ngôi mộ vô danh, trắng đất những người con đi tìm mộ bố. Mưa tả tơi xuống họ. Những đứa con chưa biết mặt cha, những người cha không thể trở về nhà. Tiếng gọi con còn chôn sâu trong ngực, tiếng gọi cha hơn 30 năm thao thức. Đêm nay tôi nghe tiếng chân cha và con từ hai nẻo trời đất. Những bước chân dần dật lần tìm về nhau, những bước chân cạn máu, lạc nhau qua triệu dặm đường, lạc nhau qua nghìn thế kỷ. Mỗi bàn chân tôi đặt lên đất nước, đang đặt lên bao nhiêu thân thể lạnh khói hương trong lòng đất. Dẫm lên bao nhiêu nước mắt của những người con chưa tìm được mộ cha mình. You know, quite a few years ago, I went to Washington, D.C. To visit a friend with my husband. And my husband brought me to the Vietnam War Memorial. And we went there and I couldn't go in. I told him, please, you go in first. And I stayed outside and I couldn't go in, and after a while he came out and he said, this is a very historical place. You don't go in, you are going to regret one day. And this is before I met any veteran, before I met Bruce Weigl. So I didn't have any idea about the human suffering from the American side. You know, as someone who grew up in Vietnam, I witnessed the long-lasting sorrow of war. And I hated the war, and of course it was very hard for me to be there and pay honor or pay respect to those who contributed to the sorrow. But my husband convinced me. He took my hand and led me inside. And this is the poem about what happened once I stepped inside. And in the poem there's an image of Phan Thị Kim Phúc. This is a very famous picture. Phan Thị Kim Phúc was a very young girl, and she was having lunch with her family when the napalm bomb was dropped onto her village, and her whole body was burning. She ran out of her village naked of all clothes, you know, she was burning. And her name is Phan Thị Kim Phúc.
Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Just let me say briefly, over the years I've received a lot of poems about the memorial from veterans and from other writers. After a while they begin to sound the same. There's always the reflection in the black granite. It's a very stunning monument. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. But the poems sort of got tired to me. None of the poems really transcended that first moment. And when you see the wall, it's a little bit too easy. And then when I read this poem and started translating this poem, I was a little uneasy about it because there's a challenge built into the poem. A challenge of the wall, a challenge of the power that stands behind the wall. And you'll hear that in the poem. I just wanted to mention it because it's what makes the poem special to me. Birdsong knocks on the White House. Lincoln's smile resounds. Sunset soaks Washington in deep red. The black wall. 58,267 names I don't know, who fired gunshots into my mind, their boot tips still drenched with blood. I want to bury them once more. Agent Orange flares up its colors, and the burning Phan Thị Kim Phúc runs out from the rows of names, black, silent, the silent answer for thousands of questions. A tiny rose lights up a sharp pain, a letter dim with tears that someone wrote for his dead father. Father, today is my daughter's birthday. I wish you were here to blow with her the candles. There isn't a day that goes by without me thinking of you. Why, Father? Why did you have to go to Vietnam? Why did you have to die? The rose petals wilt. Letters carpet below the black wall. Their words flicker and bleed. I hear from the gloomy earth the sounds of American fathers carrying their babies in their arms, their eye sockets like bomb craters, their hearts bullet holes. Agent Orange lives in their bodies. Their blood flows and drags their crying babies from their arms. Every name on the black wall sinks into my skin to become each face of the fallen Americans. Washington this afternoon. Red sunset or tears? Here. Please real quick, Mark. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You haven't given me? Yeah.
So my visit to the Black Wall really changed me. This letter was there, and as I read it, I stood there and I cried for a long time, and it was the first time that I really understood that it was not us who suffer. So Bruce comes back to Vietnam very often, and he has many wonderful friends there. Many of them fought in the same war, and many of them are still very miserable. And the next poem, he talks about one of those meetings.
Many of you may know the novel Sorrow of War by the Vietnamese writer Bao Ninh. Bao Ninh was a young infantryman in a youth brigade of 500 fellow soldiers, and 498 of them were killed. He was one of 2 survivors. So he carries this sorrow of war with him everywhere. It's in his eyes. And he's a very sweet man and dear friend. But when he drinks, it gets a little scary because this stuff begins to emerge. And one night at a restaurant, it was getting very serious. I was even a little frightened by what was happening, and Quay Mai came and saved the day. So this is a poem called Blues for Quay Mai. At a bar on One Kim Lake in Hanoi, 2nd floor of 5, I think, dusky evening settling into night, with my friend who survived the slaughter by Americans of 490 out of 500 of his own, survived, I say, too easily for his sake. And he is beautifully wild in the space around us, around him, with his stories, brilliant but lost too, so deeply he can't help but give it all away in his eyes, the other side of the mirror. And though we tried to toast the old pain away with good whiskey and beer from Hanoi, and with the fried inner organs of animals, the haunting world would not leave his eyes. So I wanted to hide her, to scream something out, to release the pressure that had grown around me. And then an angel came into the room, and in Vietnamese she sat down with us and calmed some troubled waters. In my mind, I took her hand and walked across the room to the empty black piano and played a streak of B-flat blues for her, to try and escape the velocity of my friend's hurt, if only for a minute. And like a river, the notes flowed from my fingers, the room trembling now around a frozen center, until the scale runs out and the roaring dark comes back into being.
As Tom has said, I was born in a very small village in the north of Vietnam. Vietnam is a nation of immigrants. A lot of Vietnamese had to abandon our country and go overseas. Many of them live here in America. But within Vietnam, because of conflicts, because of wars, because of poverty, we had to move away from our birthplace. And when I was 6 years old, we had to leave our village. And I remember it was a dark, dark night. I was really scared. We were going to the south, and I knew the Southerners didn't like those who came from the north. They thought we were communists coming to steal their jobs. There has been a lot of reconciliation between Vietnam and the US, but among the Vietnamese, it's still very sensitive. So I remember that night. We had a small hut. We didn't even have a house. So we packed everything, even our pots and pans. And we had a bag, each of us carried. In our town, we went to the train station in a buffalo cart. And, our town was so small that the train wouldn't stop. It was just running slowly, so we all had to run along the train. And my father ran in first, and he dangled his body out of the window, and he pulled us up one by one. I was so scared, I was running. I was 6 years old, running with my bag of, chopsticks and bowls, and I had to be pulled up into the train. And once I got up there, and I stood by the window, and I looked back to my village, and I didn't know whether I could come back one day. So this poem is about my father's home village. I'm going to read in Vietnamese first.
Okay.
Surprise him. Quê nội. Quê nội vạt ngô dậy thì con gái ngày cha ta bé dại, đợi bà về vàng vạt cỏ triền đê. Quê nội mây chiều ngủ mê, ông ta thổi lửa nắng về, tựa cửa mướp vàng bờ ao. Chuồn chuồn bay cao, cào cào bay thấp, giếng khơi trong vắt gọi mưa bay về. Chiến tranh ập tới, cha làng ra đi, bóng người về lác đác, nỗi đau trắng tạc trên tóc người già. Tuổi thơ của cha lớn cùng bom đạn, sau mùa nắng hạn lũ lụt tràn về. Quê nội lời thề cha lồng vào nhẫn cỏ, trong một chiều gió cầu hôn cùng mẹ. Đường làng bé bé ngăn ngác tiếng cười, hoa gạo đỏ trời thay cho áo cưới. Sương về răng lưới, thơ thần ao làng, ta oe oe khóc một ngày thu sang. Hoa cải vàng, dâm bụt thì đỏ, trên triền đê gió anh ta thả diều. Ta vùi khoai nướng, ta chạy, ta trốn, chữ xanh mơn mởn lúa mạ mẹ gieo. Dốc làng treo leo bao mùa thất bát, dáng người còng lưng miệt mài gieo hạt, cánh đồng nứt nẻ hốc hác tia nhìn. Cha ta vẫn tin, vẫn cày, vẫn cuốc, đường làng lại thơm mùi rơm thân thuộc. Bão về xô đổ cây lạo, gạo đầu làng, lũy tre lại mọc những mùa non măng. Đình làng cong, hoa xoan thì tím, hoàng hôn xuống la lả cánh cò. Trong những giấc mơ, ta ôm rơm ngủ, mùa ta no đủ vì còn quê hương.
My father's home village. Among the new corn, my father waited for his mother. The grass on the dike shriveled. The afternoon in deep sleep, my grandfather started the fire. Sunlight came to rest on our doorstep. Moop flowers made the pond golden. Dragonflies flew high. Grasshoppers flew low, calling rain to come and fill the fresh, clear well. The war rushed in. Village men left and few came back, pain engraved white on the old one's hair. My father's childhood was filled with bombs and bullets. After the drought, the river flooded the village. My father tied his promise into a grass ring, and during a windy afternoon, he proposed marriage to my mother. The small road filled with laughter, the gao flowers set fire to the sky, the leisurely dew came to weave its net on the pond. Upon the arrival of autumn, I cried my first tear. The vegetable flowers are gold, the hibiscus red. On the windy dike, my brother's kite flew high. I baked sweet potatoes in hot ash. I ran to hide among the young green rice my mother had sown. Through hungry seasons, the village hill was steep. People bending their backs, patiently tending their seeds, their gazes haunted by cracked fields. My father still believed, still plowed and hoed, the village roads fragrant again with the scent of new cut hay. Storms come, destroy the gao tree at the village gate, but the bamboo grove gave birth to new seasons of young plants. The curves of the village temple, the Persian lilacs purple, the sunset with low-flying stork wings. I hug the rice straw to sleep because I keep my homeland in my heart. My harvest is rich all year round.
Final poem to relieve you of the suffering tonight, listening to us. So this is the title poem for this book, The Secret of Hoa Sen. My dress is called áo dài Vietnamese traditional dress, and this is hand embroidered, and it's the lotus flowers. So that's our national flowers, and lotus flowers is my favorite flower because of its strength. If you go to Vietnam, you may see a pond which is so clear without anything during the winter in the north of Vietnam. Everything disappeared. The lotus was staying under the mud. So when spring comes, suddenly there are tiny green dots. The young leaves of lotus are blooming, and even the leaves smell really good. Whenever I was stressed, I would ride my motorbike to the lotus pond, and I could sit there and and took a deep breath. And you know, we wrap our sticky rice in lotus flowers, in lotus leaves. We serve our food in lotus leaves. So every part of the lotus plant is very valuable to us. Even the seed of the lotus, we make tea or we make soup. And inside the seed, there's the green part, which is very bitter. And if you drink it, it's very good for calming your mind. When my mother was little, she used to row a sampan boat, a bamboo boat, out to the lotus pond. And in her hands would be, you know, like some tea, green tea. And it was sunset, so she would put a little bit of tea inside the lotus flower. So when the night comes, the lotus flowers would close and the perfume would be soaked into the tea. And in the morning, early in the morning, she would go out with her boat and collect the tea for her father. So this is how the true lotus tea should be made, not, you know, in factory like nowadays. So the rich people or the royal family at that time, they would ask people to go out to the lotus pond early in the morning and collect dew on the leaves of the lotus. So they brew the tea with the dew. And that's how you should drink your tea every day, not from your tap water, please. Bí mật của hoa sen. Mi mắt của đêm nhấc tôi lên chiếc thuyền nan, dạt trôi giữa những bông hoa đang hát. Hoa sen, người yêu tôi gọi tên hoa, mùi hương ngan ngát hồng môi anh. Hoa sen, những bông hoa dịu dàng run rẩy, căng mẩy ban mai, những tán lá xanh mịn màng nín thở. Khi tôi nếm mùi thương nhớ trên khuôn mặt anh, màu sen hồng bay lên. Chỉ có hoa sen biết, giây phút tôi nở thành hoa, trên run rẩy bầu ngực ánh sáng.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you. I love you for coming out in the cold to listen to poetry. Thanks, Tom, very much for your support. And thank you, Nguyen Phan, for coming all this way to read your beautiful poems to us. The Secret of Hoa Sen. Someone asked me, I read this at a reading not long ago, someone came up afterwards and said, what is the secret of Hoa Sen?
So you have to find it out when you listen to the poem.
The eyelid of night lifted me onto a sampan, floating among the humming lotus. Hoa Sen, my darling, called out their name, so their perfume blossomed onto his lips, unveiling the mist of a world that I didn't know existed. The Hoa Sen swayed, shivered, breathless. Hold me, he said, as if from another life. When I reached for the world of his face, I could taste our longing on his skin, glistening with the new sun rising between us. Only the Hoa Sen witnessed how I became the flower that trembled on the chest of light. Thank you.
Can I say a few words? Because I want to be warm in your presence too. You know, when I landed in Chicago, the immigration officer asked, what is your reason of coming to America? So I said, I'm coming here to read my poetry. And he said, really? All that way? And he didn't believe me, you know, so he said, where's your invitation letter? So I was lucky. I had it with me, so I showed it to him, and he studied it really carefully, you know, and said, "Okay, cool." So one of the first persons I told, you know, when I got the invitation from Tom, I told my mother. She was shocked. She said, America of all countries? You know, in 1972, at the height of the Vietnam War, my mother was pregnant, was just pregnant with a baby. And the bombs fell on the road she was traveling. She jumped into a bomb shelter. And she feared she would die, and she feared the baby would die. That baby didn't die. She's here in America. That says so much about the power of poetry as a means of reconciliation. I'm deeply thankful for Poetry Attack and for Thomas, Travis, and everyone here who have shown so much hospitality and friendship and kindness. And I'm thankful to Bruce, who, unlike so many veterans, was not afraid to come back to Vietnam, and who came back and changed many, many things. Thank you so much.